Welcome, Tosha, to the Child Psych podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again for yet another event.
Thanks, Tammy, for inviting me back. I love talking with you.
Yeah, we've known Tosha and her co-author, Patty Wipfler, for, I don't know, a long time, since I read their book quite a few years ago and fell in love with their work. Just disclaimer, guys, buy their book, Listen. It is absolutely wonderful. So there'll be a link to that in the description of this podcast. Just can't say enough good things. It's one of the top 5 books I recommend for parenting, period. I just think it's your work's absolutely amazing. So, and that says a lot. We have to read a lot of books for our job. So it's very recommended. But today we're going to talk really specifically about aggression in kids and like what we do with that. This is one of your areas. I know you do a lot of work with boys specifically and parents and coaching around that. And we've had discussions about this before. So we're just kind of continuing that discussion and reiterating some of that. So, I think it depends culturally, when we're speaking of whether parents can make space for this or not. But why do you think our boys are more prone to showing aggression maybe than our girls? Not to say girls don't show aggression, but boys tend to be default to that. And it seems to be a presenting issue more like when I do intakes with our boys.
Yeah, my assessment of that and my, non-scientific assessment of that is
It's okay. Just wait. It will actually not. We can cut this out because it's 2 separate recordings. Sorry, my housekeeper is here. So just keep going.
Okay. So my assessment is that it's really about the environment. So it's kind of like you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So it's not that, boys are bad or something is wrong with them. I think a lot of the time what's going on is there are expectations that they are unable to meet. So for example, like school is a good example. I see this all the time. The expectation that this boy is going to sit still for an extended period of time without being silly or sort of kicking his neighbor or inciting his neighbor in some way is not realistic for many 5-year-old boys. And so what ends up happening is rather than reassess whether or not the expectations fit the child, we tend to blame the child. And we do that more with boys than we do with girls. With girls, the tendency tends to be, what can we shift about the environment? What's going on here? How can we help you? And with boys, our default tends to be, what's wrong with you? Why can't you uphold your side of the deal, kind of a thing? You need to be quiet. And so it's really more about the way we look at things than I think a gender differential.
I literally had this conversation with my 7-year-old this morning. We've been on break for my son's actually been off for 3 weeks because we spent a week skiing. And he just sat on my lap this morning and said, Mom, I don't want to go to school. And this is a kiddo who actually does fairly well in school, like socially, behaviorally. And I said, can you tell me more about that? And he goes, it's so hard to sit still. I just want to move. And like my heart breaks because this is a systemic issue in Canada, in the US, where I believe wholeheartedly schools are designed for girls, not boys. Like girls do better, hunter-gatherer metaphor here. Like boys were hunters, women were gatherers. Girls are wired more for language and connecting and talking, and boys are more kinesthetic on average than our girls are, especially with their learning style. So asking, my 7-year-old to basically spend 6 hours in a classroom with very little movement and not feel absolutely frustrated and kind of defeated that he can't be himself. It's just like, as a mom, I'm like heartbroken every time I hear that. And I know I can't like make the schools change this. I wish they would. And they are getting better. I feel like there is more awareness, but we're not there yet. Not here anyway.
Right. And if you think of, my business mission, which is to create a more peaceful world, one sweet boy at a time, I'm thinking about boys in the bigger picture of how they are growing into men and how they are moving in the world. And we have a big problem because we're sending the message. If we continuously put boys in situations where they're not able to succeed, they then feel badly about themselves. Their behavior gets worse. The responses from adults generally worsen. And again, their behavior gets worse. And we just end up spiraling downward. It's bad for not just our families, not just our schools, not just our communities, but for the world. And what we're seeing is that graduation rates for boys are down. Girls are surpassing boys in terms of their academic achievements, all the way through school at this point. We have a problem. We have a problem. I know we're not here to talk about school, but I do think we need to pay attention. Sometimes we live in a time when we're really looking at like black and white, right? Oppressor and oppressed. Boys and men, because they tend to be in positions of power, don't, I guess, have the luxury a lot of the time of people taking a moment to think about how are you struggling, right? How are you struggling and how might we help you? Instead, we tend to fall to blame. We fall back on blame. And one of the reasons that I think my work is really important is because I want to switch that around. I'm not saying the behavior is okay. If a child's aggressive, for example, if they're hitting or if they're, disrupting class, I'm not saying that that's okay. But I'm saying, let's ask the right questions. Let's ask how we can help this child. Let's ask how we can set this child up for success rather than punishing and shaming and disciplining in ways that lead to him feeling worse about himself and then, ultimately the behavior worsening.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is we diagnose instead of, well, maybe we need to make a shift from diagnosing the child to diagnosing the environment and saying
Mm-hmm.
what isn't working for this child. I mean, that's what I know. My work as a psychologist is what I usually spend time doing is
Mm-hmm.
asking questions like, how much sleep is this little guy getting? How much play does he get? How many hours outside does he get? Like, there's all these questions I need to know. What do we do when there's tears in the home? Because I think that is such a huge misconception, is that girls are more sensitive. And if we look at the biology of boys, they're actually more sensitive than girls are.
Yeah,
But
I think we're just more tolerant of our girls' sensitivity, right? Not even tolerant, but welcoming. Whereas we're not even tolerant of the feelings in our boys. We tend to shut them down quite quickly.
which brings us to like a really good point. Um, and you let me know your thoughts on this, but to me, a lot of times aggression to me is a flight from vulnerability. Like they can't get down to their deep vulnerable feelings, like the sad and scared, and so they're guarded. So then their default might be to go to aggression because that's more of a secondary, often, not always, but it's often a secondary emotional response instead of feeling the sadness and feeling the fear. If they're anxious about school or they're worried about something, they're really sad because they got rejected that day. Is we are so quick to want to quash those feelings when little boys are very young, that they don't feel that they can always express them. And then their default when they feel stress is to then go to aggression because it has to go somewhere.
Yes, I think this is such an important point because the aggression is this secondary feeling or emotion or behavior, sort of it's what we see, it's the surface. And we tend to get scared of it. But if we can understand that underneath there is fear, sadness, some other sort of more primal feeling, we can help our child through the aggression, right? Rather than squelch the behaviors on top or try to control the behaviors on top, we want to keep everybody safe and create space for the feelings to come out, right? We talk about this in our book using the tool of stay listening, where we're staying and we're actually creating safe space for the feelings to be released. Because what happens, and I hear this all the time with parents I work with, the child is hitting, for example, and the parent will come in and hold a limit around that. So not let the child hit. They might block, for example, and a parent who comes to me will say, well, he really wants to hurt me. And we'll work on mindset and understand, no, he doesn't want to hurt you, right? He's not manipulative. He's doing the best he can, but this is the way the behavior is showing at the moment. That's okay. Protect yourself and don't take his words personally. And what we see is if that parent can hold that limit, keep them safe, the child will move from a space of hitting or kicking to a more vulnerable place where there are very likely tears. And those sessions often end up with the child curled up on a parent's lap or moving towards rather than away from the parent, and in a loving kind of a way, in a way where they're looking for comfort. And so oftentimes a huge win in my community is when a parent says, my boy just had a really big cry. Like he was super upset about something and he was, trying, beating up on his sister, and I moved in and didn't let him hurt her. And he tried for a little while to hit and kick, and I blocked and I kept everybody safe. And all of a sudden he shared something that happened at school and burst into tears that had nothing to do with sister and nothing to do with the current situation at all. So it's quite amazing how the process works.
Yeah, if in your book, I'm not going to get the metaphor exactly right, but I have reiterated this metaphor to thousands of parents at some point in my career. You guys give this example of a child's life is like a digestive system. Can you talk about, do you know what I'm talking about, that where we talk about that emotions and experiences come in and how they process that?
Yeah, well, I think what you're referring to is this idea. It's of emotions being sort of like an emotional poop, if you will,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
as we move through the world, all of us, our kids, us, we encounter all sorts of situations that oftentimes land as hurts, right? They don't sit well. We feel nicked or slighted in some way, and if we are lucky enough to be in a space where somebody can listen to us. Release that feeling, right? So if let's say you say something to me and you inadvertently hurt my feelings, or maybe you're really angry and you hurt my feelings, and I come off the call with you and I'm feeling really upset, and I can call a friend or turn to a friend or a partner and cry or get angry, I am making space and they are holding space for me to heal from that little nick. And so what happens then is that I don't carry that hurt with me. But oftentimes what happens, and we see this a lot with our little boys as we're trying to, as we squelch that space for them to be able to feel, is that they don't get to work through the hurts as they're setting in. And so they I like to think of it as like sedimentary rock, like you see on the side of the beach, right? These layers just kind of pile up on top of each other and harden. And then that's where we get rigid behaviors.
Yeah.
So what we want that process where, we don't want the hurt to come in, but it's just an inevitable, reality of being human. And so what we want is to keep that system flowing, just like our digestive system. The hurt comes in and then there's space for it to come out. Now, you and me, we can make an appointment with our therapist, or we can set up a listening partnership, which is a tool that we talk about in the book. But for our children, we are generally that person. We're that safe space for them to release. And so we want to create that space for that emotional poop to come out so that it doesn't pile up and harden and those rigid behaviors don't set in.
Exactly. And I know in your metaphor that we're talking about, there are different ways that how we prevent or kind of treat that emotional blockage, that kind of emotion, I call it emotional constipation. And we discussed that, our kids need laughter and play, and they need tears. And that is so hard for often parents. And, when they come to me and they say, since my child's been seeing you, they're crying more. And I'm ready to pop a bottle of champagne being like, yes, of course they're crying more. Like that's how we're moving the feelings. They were they were stuck, and now there's tears because that's where the healing happens. So we have these really wonderful opportunities, and especially for boys needing that kinesthetic, like gross motor movement is, lots of play, lots of movement, laughter. And then you guys have a tool. We'll talk about that maybe next. And then you also have the tears. Like you have like these moments where they need connection when they finally get to that place where we get underneath the aggression. Like we get to the primary emotion, which is the sadness and the fear and the worry and the hurt, that we have to make space for that within proximity to the child, not alone in their room where we throw them in a timeout.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is I think about us as adults. When I work with adults, and a lot of this work, as you know, in parenting is helping adults move through their challenges so that they can show up more often in ways that they feel good about with their kids. And I mentioned stay listening earlier, a tool where we basically stay and listen to our child's feelings rather than shut the feelings down and allow for that emotional poop, allow for the healing to happen. But we parents need that too. The thing about it is we're older, our rigidities are more set in place, and it's oftentimes, unless we were listened to well as a child, it's oftentimes a longer, bit more arduous process for an adult to kind of peel back the layers and get to a feeling of safety and comfort where we can actually release those feelings. But our kids, those feelings are right on the surface. And so our job as parents is actually easier than sometimes we make it. Like mostly we have to get out of our own way because the child's body already knows how to heal. It's already doing the work. It's just that we're interrupting it all the time, right? We're trying to shh and send it to its room and, you know, get rid of all the emotions, just quiet. Like we've misdiagnosed the problem. We think that the release of the feelings, that the tantrum and the sounds and the loudness and the disruption is the problem, where that's actually the solution. Like the problem's already happened. The hurt has already set in. It's done. It's there. And what's trying to happen now is the healing process. And
I
so
love that.
we just need to shift how we see it so that instead of trying to quiet it and put the lid on it, we can create that safe space for it and the healing can happen. So it's actually much easier than we make it out to be.
Yeah, I think the biggest block. So if you think of like maybe you're a parent listening and you have a kiddo who's spitting on you or like kicking you or hitting you, and you're like, I have to sit there and take that. You want me to take that? And what would you say to that? Because I know parents have probably said that to you. Like they're going to say, like, you want me to sit there and be you know, I've heard parents say, you want my child to abuse me and you want me to say that's okay? What would you say to that?
Yeah. So I get this question all the time. I don't see it that way because I really like if we think about what our goal is a shift of behavior over time. And we want to help our children build their emotional intelligence so that they can grow up and make good decisions and relate well to other people. We know that the ability to process feelings and share feelings is key to a child being able to grow up and do those things. And so I try to tell parents, or I do tell parents, that when we're stay listening with a child, kind of put on your spacesuit. I imagine like, I almost said an alien, not an alien, but what do you call those people who go to space?
Astronaut.
Astronaut, exactly. I'm like, what are those people called?
It's your first day back to work. It's fine.
I know. I've been off for 2 weeks. I can't. Yeah. So, you know, the helmet and the big white puffy suit, it's like, you know, nothing's going to get to you kind of, because this really isn't about you. I don't see it as abusing the parent, but it's really about a mindset issue. Because what you'll see is that if you're able to stay listen, like let's just say your child is spitting. I'm not saying just like, you know, stand there and let your child spit all over you, but you could use play. For example, you could turn it into a spitting contest. Who could spit farther? You can, you know, go like, oh my God, you know, I need some windshield wipers, right? You're going for laughter because laughter is a way of healing. It heals light fears. So it's really like, can we shift the way we're looking at it? Can we move ourselves out of that place of like, I'm the victim and this kid is like coming after me, to I'm actually being really thoughtful and strategic about how I help this child. And if a parent feels powerful in that situation, if they understand what's going on, if they can think, okay, spitting, my child's feeling completely disconnected, probably quite scared and alone, like what tools could I use to help him move towards me, to help him feel my presence? Maybe play is one, you know, maybe holding a limit lovingly is one. You know, there are lots of different things that we can do, but it's not, you're not just sitting there and taking it. You're not just sitting there and being abused. And what parents see is that when they start to do this, the behaviors actually lessen. And sometimes what I say to parents is like, what's the alternative? Because a lot of parents they'll say, well, you know, if I don't punish him, if I don't send him away, if I don't yell, then, you know, he doesn't respond. He's not going to learn. Mm-hmm. And what I say is, you know, you are the leader of your family. You get to do this however you want to do it. But let's just sit back and think about why you're here. What have you been doing? And then they think about what they've been doing, and I say, like, how is it working? Right?
Yeah.
Do you feel good about your relationship, your connection with your child? Do you feel like it's moving in a direction where you're going to stay close throughout their teen years when they really need you and you really need them to come to you? Right? Are you seeing the behavior improve over time? Right? If the spitting thing is happening, 5 times a day, or every time, he doesn't get what he wants. So are you down to once a day, once a week, once a month? Is it moving in that direction? Because that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
We can't change things immediately. It's like saying, I'm 100 pounds overweight. I want to lose 100 pounds. You're not going to lose 100 pounds in one day. You're going to lose 1 pound, and then another pound, and then another pound. That's what this process is. It takes time. But the alternative is that we continue to kind of erode our relationship with our child.
Yeah. And I think parents need to come into these really hard situations the best they can, looking at the child in a different way so we're not as reactive. Because one of the worst things you can do when a child is in a state of aggression, which is a state of fear, is to come at them with dysregulation and aggression. And so sometimes when we can simply look at the child in a different way, if I say, I'm seeing them as they are scared and overwhelmed, and they are going to feel embarrassed after this, because kids don't feel good about losing it. A lot of kids feel a lot of shame around it.
Yes.
They feel something's wrong with them. I know I feel that way if I've lost it on my kids or my husband. Like, I feel like I'm a horrible mom. Like, unless you then remedy those hurts, it piles up. That shame piles up too. And every time we feel that feeling come up, we also get flooded with shame. So making assumptions that your child is doing the best they can with the limited tools they have. They are not angry. I mean, they are angry, but you're going to say, I'm choosing to see them as fearful instead of angry. Because
Right.
when we see a child as fearful, I think we have more compassion for them.
That's right. I talk about aggression as being fear in disguise, and I think that's a really important mindset shift. There's something that you said that reminded me of a point that I always like to make that sometimes doesn't land so well. It's different than what many professionals will tell you as a parent, but you talk about a child not wanting to hurt, not wanting to make their parents' life miserable, doing the best that they can. And so there's often a desire and even an urge or a desperation on our part as parents to have a conversation about what happened after it's over. So, for example, this spitting scenario we were talking about earlier. So afterwards, it's very common for a parent to say to me, well, when do I talk to him about it? How do I talk to him about it? Like, I need to tell him it's not okay. He needs to know it's not okay. And my response to that is, if talking worked as a way to heal, then you wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be needing to look at this differently. And in my experience, if we can kind of close the door to that stay listening session where the spitting was going on, and maybe we used play, maybe we used limits, whatever. The child, ultimately got to a place where perhaps he was able to cry or even laugh, right? But the emotions were sort of getting deeper and deeper. Great, that's healing. We don't need to talk about it afterwards. And oftentimes, if we do, that tends to land as shame.
Shame. Yeah.
And that shame then cycles back into the challenging behavior. So parents say, well, when do I talk about it? How do I talk about it? I actually don't think you need to talk about it. Like, and I think the litmus test as a parent is just ask yourself, when your child is in a sweet space, just think about, like, maybe you're cuddling on the couch or reading a book or eating breakfast or whatever. You're just having like a nice little time together. Everybody's fine. If you asked him, do you think it's okay to spit at me? What would he say? Right? He knows.
No. He knows.
Right. Yeah. He knows it's not okay. So it's not actually, the problem isn't that he doesn't have the information, which is what we're trying to rectify with the conversation. That's not the problem. He knows right from wrong. He knows justice from injustice, but his emotional system is gunked up. he's not able in that moment to behave differently, which is why the somatic experience of healing is how we're going to help him through.
Yeah. And not to mention, if you're using limit setting in that moment, like I can think of this really clear example with my son. He's 2. I had to set a limit because he was making a mess in my bathroom, and I had to get to work, and I had to, I could see it building up, and he had been too many transitions, yada, yada, yada. Like I knew why. So he didn't really need the limit because I let him play in my bathroom and make a mess. It wasn't, but I could see he was like really backed up. Like I could just see it. He can't make eye contact with me. He's looking all over the place. He's starting to rev up. So I just set a limit, sometimes unnecessarily, being like, you may not play in the water. And then he proceeded to have a meltdown and he hit me. And I sat with him on the floor and I just held his hands and I said, you're really frustrated, but you may not hit mom. And that is all the talking I did. And then he, flailing around and crying and screaming. And as long as he didn't hurt me, I let go of his hands. You continue to let them, yell and scream and just do their thing. And if he came at me again, I blocked it or hold his hands. You may not hit me. So the limit's been set. You're saying it's not okay to do this by setting the limit. You've already you've sent the message. It's not okay. So
Right.
I didn't have a big discussion with him about it later. It was clear.
Right.
You're frustrated.
And
you may not do that.
Right. And also what you do is you set a limit around the behavior, but not around his feelings. And I think that's something that we need to differentiate, because so often we parents get frustrated because we want to put limits on how our children feel. And that's not possible. We have no control over how anybody else feels. So I always say to parents, you get to decide what the limits are as the parent. You do get to make that decision, but you don't get to decide and you don't have any control about how your child feels about that limit. So part of your decision about whether or not you are going to set that particular limit in that particular moment is, do you have sort of the capacity in that moment to listen to a possible upset? Because your child probably won't like that limit, right? He didn't want to stop playing and it was upsetting to him. Okay, he's allowed to be upset. We can't make him like the limit, but if you needed to get to work and you needed to have the play stop and you needed to move on, well, then that was a decision that you made. You held that limit and you allowed him to feel his way through. And what I'm guessing happened
is cried.
Sorry?
He cried.
He cried for a period of time. And then, he had some shaky, deep breaths, right? Maybe he crawled into your lap. For sure, he could make eye contact again. Yeah. He probably didn't discuss it and he just moved on to the next thing, breakfast, can I have breakfast? Or, can I sit in the red seat or whatever, right? It was like it never happened.
Yeah. I remember my mom showing up and I was like, oh, you just missed World War II. She's like, you never know. And I was like, Like, to me, that's a 2-year-old. Like that's right. They do kick and hit and spit and because they're, sensory wise, they get so overwhelmed so easily. So it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah. And the more we sit with them and we use laughter, like sometimes use silliness, sometimes I use a limit, depending on how far gone they are, honestly, is probably where I'm at. How far has the lid flipped would probably be the delineating factor here. Then it's like they move on their day. And by doing this, I can tell you, I have a son who he hasn't hit someone since he was 3. Like that was it. But using your tools from your book, the book Listen, eradicated aggression in my son. I have never seen that ever from him, but I used the tools from your book. And so I'm like, everyone who has I know the book can be used with older children, but I find your book extremely useful for preschool, toddler years, like before, like that age between like 18 months and 6 years, because it's so somatic based and it's so play based and it's just their language, right? It's not cognitive, which is why I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So and it's truly what we need to be using all the way through, but the earlier you start, the earlier you see results, essentially. So I love working with families of younger kids, but I do, if you have an older kid out there, I just want to say it is not too late. It is never too late. You can dive in at any moment. I know people who started when their kids were 13 and it made a huge difference.
Yeah, so let's take that, because I've got some parents obviously listening who have teenagers, or I have therapists. We have a lot of therapists who listen to this, and social workers and teachers. Now, let's say you've got like an older child. I can think of like when Tanya was fostering teenagers, this came up because she teaches a lot of courses on aggression. And she had some pretty extreme aggression. Like she had, foster kids who one came out with her with a knife, another one tried to throw her down the stairs. Like there are extreme cases. And so a big 13-year-old boy who you can't like physically maybe hold his hands or is coming at you, maybe sitting on the floor isn't safe. Like, what would you tell those parents? I know we're giving a really extreme example, but I think that's important to acknowledge that some kids come from really hard places and their aggression can escalate quite high. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what you would do with parents that would have kids like where it's quite extreme and they're older and they're quite big. Like they're not, they're not 3 anymore. You can't put them in your lap.
Right. Yeah. And obviously, this is a big, complicated question, and there are likely other therapies that
Yeah.
the child is in and needing, and support that
Yes.
child is needing. But what I do want to say about it is that connection is always the answer. Isolation, punishment, shame is never the answer. So you want to take the first step of toughening yourself up emotionally, is what I would say, because a lot of this starts as kind of emotional aggression, if you will. Like maybe you get your you get called names, that type of thing. I want to get you in good enough emotional shape so that you can realize this isn't about you, it's about them, and they need you to be strong, right? Their prefrontal cortex is offline, and they need you to co-regulate. And so if your lid is also flipped, they have nowhere to go. They have no one to co-regulate. So you want to get yourself, and this is outside the situation. This is pre, right? So in my world, I would say you want to have regular listening partnerships. In somebody else's world, it might be regular therapy appointments or anything that you do that can keep you sort of sharp and in good shape emotionally. And then I like to just say things like, tell me more, or I hear you, or I'm here, or I love you no matter what.
Yeah.
So oftentimes staying quiet is better when the aggression starts. But if there's space to say something, I would say something like that. Essentially, they need to know that you're not scared, that you love them, you're going to keep everybody safe. In terms of the safety bit, it might be at that point where you need to have knives locked up. I definitely, have clients who have been in those types of situations.
Yeah.
It might be that you need to be on the other side of a door. So
Yeah.
you can't actually be face to face with a 13-year-old who's bigger than you and who's threatening. And so maybe you're on the other side of the door and maybe he bangs on the door, but that's okay. I'd rather that happened than you get hurt physically. And again, you might not need to say much at all, but every once in a while from the other side of the door, I'd want you to say, I love you no matter what.
Yeah. And
Or
I
or
hear. Yeah.
we're gonna get through this is another great one. We're gonna get through this, because almost always that feeling of feeling alone or isolated goes hand in hand with that fear and aggression. So we're going to get through this is a message that's like, we're a team. I'm here with you. Because the expectation and what has probably happened to that child all the way up until now is that when he acted aggressively, the adult in the situation either punished, came down hard, or left.
Yeah.
And now we're showing something different. We're modeling, hey, I'm not going to take my love away. I am not going to leave you in this terrified state. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to do it in a way such that I can stay safe, because I know you don't want to hurt me. And that's another thing you can say, I'm not going to let you hurt me. I know you would never want to hurt me.
Yeah. No, and what I'm hearing too is we're still staying connected. Like we may have to remove ourselves, but we're not going in the kitchen to cook dinner and locking them in the room. We're
No.
sitting on the other side of the door, we're talking. And to me, what I would suggest, this was my client, I would say when you hear like them start to settle and you hear, maybe their voice is calmed, go back in. Like as soon as you think it's safe, try to go back in. That's our goal. Our goal is to end up in the room. We may have to sit on the other side of the door for 15, 20 minutes till we feel like it might be safe, but then try to go in the room. So we're going to get to the stay listening, but we just have to keep ourselves safe, and then when we feel like assess the situation, then try to go back in.
Right. I mean, I would argue that you are stay listening, even if you're on the other side of a door. That is stay listening. You are not, as long as you're not sending the child away or removing yourself, like, I'm out of here, get yourself together and, I'll come back once you can, act like a normal human being or whatever the things are that we say. As long as you're not doing that, you are staying and you are listening. The fact that there's a door between you, for example, in this example, doesn't take away from the fact that you're stay listening. Your attention is on that child. And because every once in a while you're saying, I'm still here, I'm still here, I'm with you, or
Yeah.
we're going to get through this. They know. And by the way, you hear my tone as I'm saying these things. Like, your tone is very important, or more as important, if not more important than what comes out of your mouth, is
Yeah.
how that comes out of your mouth. So the fact that I'm calm, we're going to get through this. And I like to put a term of endearment on the end, right? I always say, sweet boy, we're going to get through this, sweet boy.
Yeah.
We're going to get through this. And then I'm just quiet, and then he's like, screw you, blah, 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 banging on the door, the 13-year-old, I hate you, da, 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 you're the worst mom, I'm never going to do what you say, and all the things, and you just listen, you don't interrupt, you just listen, 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 and then when he gets quiet, you might just say, I love you no matter what.
Yeah. It's so hard, but I can say, clinically speaking, I can attest to Tosha's words here that this does work. I've worked with hundreds of kids, so has Tanya, in clinical private practice, where we've recommended Tosha's tools and Patty's tools to families. And once, it takes time, it's not overnight, but Rome was not built in a day, but this does work. Like, this is really it's a solution. It's trauma informed, it's attachment informed, it's somatically informed. And so parents are hopefully eating this up. I'm like, go buy her book, listen. And this is what I love about this book, is Patty and Tosha wrote it in such a way that there are so many concrete examples and tools that you can use for everyday problems that come up with kiddos. And what I love is you learn to catch them before they escalate to the aggression. That's the thing, is the way this book is written is when you catch a little bit of rigidity and you catch a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of defiance, whatever it is, like, you can see them get prickly, is what I call it with my kids. They're prickly. That's when you use the tools. And then we don't see such huge upsets. They do happen, but they will become less and less frequent because you become more attuned. You've got that radar for being like, oh, I can see it. Like, they need to have the meltdown, or I need to be playful right now. Maybe we're going to play a game or use, something to get laughter or whatever that is. And then we don't have these huge upsets, but it requires us to be a little on the ball and, like, knowing our child. And when they get prickly, when they get a little,
it absolutely does. But it really does work. I mean, I'm a pragmatist, right? I'm not dogmatic about this approach. Like, I'm open to whatever is going to work. Like, I work with families of young boys who are struggling with aggression. I want the aggression to stop. I want you to have peaceful homes. I want you to laugh together, to play together, to enjoy one another. And I know that's possible. And the reality is no, it doesn't happen overnight, but it happens way more quickly than you can imagine. And if you've been trying a million other things for years and years, it's going to work way faster than that. Like, people really do see things turn around oftentimes in a matter of weeks.
Beautiful. Where can people find you, Tosha? So, I mean, I keep talking about your books. I just love your book so much, but let them know, where else can they find you?
Yeah, my website is parentingboyspeacefully.com. That's the best place to find me. And the book you can find anywhere where books are sold.
Yeah, and again, I can't say enough. I recommend it. All my therapists had to buy it when we're doing parent consults. I'm like, you need this book. This is one of those really practical parenting books, and it's not a traditional discipline book. I think it just works wonders with kids, and it's so focused on connection, which I just love. And again, like that somatic, really like that body work and laughter and play. So thank you again, Tosha. Like, this is why we just keep bugging you, and we'll probably have you back another time. It's just, I think your work with boys is revolutionary, and you're really making a huge impact in the world. Like, this kind of parenting is what makes a difference for generations. So thank you for bringing your gifts to the world.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me a platform to be able to share it widely. It is really important work to me.
Yeah, we know. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.